Hello orchid friends, how are you? Welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time watching my video, my channel is all about orchids. From what orchids I have, how I grow them, my thoughts on certain orchid topics, to what orchids in my collection are blooming, etc. So if you want to follow along my orchid hobby adventure, please consider subscribing to my channel and turn on the notification. Today, in this video, we're going to look at my second Phalaenopsis equestris. This one is a species orchid, and this is the second one in my collection that bloomed later this year. But thankfully, they do have a little bit of overlap, and later in the video, you'll see a few more photos of them having bloom overlaps. And at the end of the video, I'll also share with you what I did this orchid after it bloomed. So beginning of May, I started to see signs of a new flower spike. I was really thrilled, and it was growing relatively well and relatively fast. But then at the same time, I was actually not, for some reason, I was thinking that this orchid could do better. So I keep looking at its roots, and I wasn't sure what I was looking at. But nonetheless, the spike was the main reason, or the main focus for me anyway at the time. So I didn't really do too much, because obviously I don't want to sabotage the flowers by doing anything to it. So I was just, in my head thinking something is not quite right with this orchid. Sure enough, it was in buds, but then it started to have some signs of bud blast. And this really is because I moved to my house end of May, and right now, summertime, or in June, it was already getting really hot. So that had a lot to do with the bud blast, I think, because I still can't quite figure out the perfect balance between a larger house, the humidity swing, as well as the central air, plus the hot summer that we have. So anyway, this orchid had quite a bit of bud blast, and finally, around end of July 23rd, I believe, it started to have its first bloom. And then here are some photos between, overlap between the number 1 and number 2. They're both equestris and cerulean type. So that's why you see that they both have a little bit of purple on their lip. And the rest of the flower is white with a little bit of that yellow color in the center. Equestris has a little bit of fragrance, and the flower spikes are, or can be, sequentially blooming for you if there are bigger plants. The two that I have right now, they are still relatively young plant. Last year they both bloomed, but actually one of them bloomed, and then it didn't keep the spike. I think this one is the one that bloomed last year too, but it did not keep its spike. And this year the spike is thicker. I'm really thinking that it's the environmental reasons that cause the bud blasts. I don't think equestris is known for finicky buds or being finicky when it's in bud. But I don't know for sure, because last year when I first got equestris, that's really my first experience with equestris, because I've always loved bigger flowers. So equestris was really never quite my first choice of orchid, but it still managed to bloom for about a month or so, and then mid-August second half of August was when the flower spike started to yellow. And that's when I really started to think about whether I need to make some changes, because for some reason I was having that feeling that this orchid wasn't quite happy. And here's the main reason. If you look at the roots and also the cup, the cup size, I think this cup is a little too big for it. I mean, technically with semi-hydro, You can use a slightly bigger cup and get away with it. But this one, I feel it just didn't take off as fast as I expected to go. So I only see roots going or circling around the top third, and there is nothing toward the bottom 2/3 of the cup. So I'm thinking, this cup is way too big, and maybe this orchid, because it's still such a young plant, that it just doesn't have enough roots yet. So it could potentially be simply having too much moisture from the bottom, and that wet-dry cycle is not completing as fast as other orchids. Because here in my environment, that wet-dry cycle typically concludes in about 7 days, a week essentially. So this one, I noticed that it can go as long as 2 weeks in summertime, and I think that is way too long, because in summertime it's already taking 2 weeks. In winter time, at least based on my last apartment, it could, this one could last for a month, and that's way too long. Anyway, so I decided that I have to give it a repot. So I found a cup that I used before. I obviously cleaned it, and then there was a time that I loved to drill holes on every side of the cup. So it's a cup from that phase. And I also found another cup with the same size. So basically I'm using the double cup method. And then I also discovered I had some bark chips. It's not really that great quality bark chip, but I didn't really want to just throw them away. So I decided to use this media, the leftover bark chips, for this orchid. So I finally took it out, and I was right? Because of the high moisture, there are some roots in the middle that just did not make it. It was so dead and so dark, so black, that it's just, they're dead. So I had to obviously do some trimming. And just as a reminder, when you are trying to cut any parts of your orchid, the tool, especially the scissor, you want to make sure you sterilize before you do any cutting. Okay, so this is, after I had finished trimming all the dead roots. So I decided to use this cup. I think this cup is a 10-ounce cup, either 8 or 10-ounce cup. Relatively small, and the roots are okay. It looks like it's the right size, and I filled the cup pretty much with just pure bark chip. I thought about putting some stones in there, but I think the cup is small enough that these bark chips, even though they're pretty fine small pieces, that it would still allow enough ventilation. It would dry up enough. Because if I don't use the outer cup in my environment, I've done some tests with this one already. It takes only 3 days to dry, and if I use the cup, it takes about 5 to 7 days, and then it'll be dry. So that's in time for me to provide another watering cycle. So that's good. So I was soaking this orchid for the very first time. I didn't soak it all the way to the top, so I think I might have added to about 50% and just let it soak. Because this orchid had a little bit, it was looking a little dry, so I wanted to just let it quickly hydrate without having too much water in it, because this orchid was having to get used to the new environment. So I didn't want to give it too much water to begin with, just some, so that this orchid is not completely dried up. And so I put it back, and then I also use an outer cup because I also like to reduce algae by blocking out sunlight. So that's what I've been using for most of my orchids, and it's working out pretty well, with this blue cup method. And finally, beginning of September 2019, the middle leaf, it was just very tiny, but now it's gotten a lot bigger. So that gives me some confidence that this orchid is somewhat liking this media and this cup, this growing method, by growing its new leaf larger and larger. How well it likes it, I don't know, so only time would tell. But so far, I think it's doing okay, at least better than I think the bigger cup that it was in. Anyway, so this is equestris number 2 this year, and I will keep you posted on its progress, and hopefully next year we'll see some more bloom out of this one. This is all I have for you today. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you would like to get more orchid related videos from my channel, please subscribe and turn on the notification. I want to wish you happy growing, and I will talk to you in my next video. Ciao!